Hello and welcome to Safe Pasture. My name is Sherry Hammers and we are continuing on in our series on the holiest of all. Right now we are on chapter 39, The High Priest Learning Obedience. Andrew Murray wrote this book. If you're just tuning in for the first time, he wrote this book in 1894, and it's just a deep study into the epistle to the Hebrews. And we'll start off with Hebrews 5, 7, and 8. Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications, with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared. Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. And he keys in on this part of the scripture, who in the days of his flesh. He said the word flesh points to human nature in the weakness, which is the mark of its fallen state. So the very fact that we have weakness is the mark that we are in a fallen state. When Jesus said to his disciples in that dark night, "Watch and pray, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak," he spoke from personal experience. He had felt that it was not enough to have a right purpose, but that unless the weakness of the flesh were upheld, or rather overcome, by power received in prayer from above, that weakness would so easily enter into temptation and become sin. So when we recognize, wow, I'm in a situation where if I let my flesh have full reign, excuse me, then it's going to lead to temptation, and then I'm just going to fall straight into sin. It says the days of his flesh, encompassed with its weaknesses, were to him a terrible reality. It was not to yield to this that he watched and prayed. So remember he said, we just talked about the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. The flesh is weak, and therefore it is liable to temptation, which leads you into sin. So that's why he said, watch and pray with me. And remember later they were sleeping and he said, could you not watch and pray with me for 1 hour? And because they had given in to the weakness of their flesh. Gethsemane was the training school where our high priest, made like to us in all things, learned his last most difficult lesson of obedience through what he suffered. So Gethsemane was the training school of obedience. He says, though he was a son, as the Son of God come from heaven, one would say that there could be no thought of his learning obedience. So, we're saying, oh, he's God. Why would he have to learn obedience? He says, but so real was his emptying himself of his life in glory, and so complete his entrance into all the conditions and likeness of our nature, that he did indeed need to learn obedience. At each state of life, he had to meet temptation and overcome it. Out of each victory, he came with his will strengthened and his power over the weakness of the flesh and the danger of yielding to its desire for earthly good, or its fear of temporal evil increased. So his power over these things, the weakness of the flesh, the danger of yielding to its desire, or its fear of temporal evil, his strength, his power was increased every time he met temptation and overcame it. Remember, we all know that Jesus lived a perfect life. He lived in a fallen body just like us, but he was able to overcome every temptation, every time, every single time. It says in Gethsemane, his trial and his obedience reached their consummation. He learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Suffering is something unnatural, the fruit of sin. That I thought was worth repeating. Suffering is the fruit of sin. Wow. God that sounds really simple, but and I'm not saying that all suffering, the person, I'm sure Andrew's not saying that. But it may not be directly, like if a little child is born with some defects that cause suffering, well, that little child is innocent. They didn't sin, but sin is traced somewhere. Sin is at the root of all of this. And because suffering is the fruit, sin is the root. So sin is what started it. Said God has made us for joy. He created us not only with the capacity, but the power of happiness, so that every breath and every healthy movement should be enjoyment. It is natural to us. It was so to the Son of God to fear and flee suffering. So we're made with wanting to enjoy happiness, and it's natural that we want to get away from suffering. He says, in this desire, there is nothing sinful. There's nothing sinful about wanting to get away from suffering. It only becomes sinful where God would have us submit and suffer, and we refuse. This was the temptation of the power of darkness in Gethsemane, for Jesus to refuse the cup. That was the temptation that the devil came and was tempting him. In his prayers and supplication with strong crying and tears, Jesus maintained his allegiance to God's will. In wrestlings and bloody sweat, he became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. The deepest suffering taught him the highest lesson of obedience. When he had yielded his will and his life, his obedience was complete, and he himself was perfected forevermore. So his will was offered, and his life was offered, and that made his obedience complete. This is our high priest. He knows what the weakness of the flesh is. He knows what it costs to conquer it, and how little we are able to do it. He lives in heaven, able to succor us, sympathizing with our weaknesses, bearing gently with the ignorant and erring, a high priest on the throne, that we may boldly draw nigh to find grace for timely help. So he knows the mess we're in. He knows how weak we are. And yet he's our high priest, and he says you can come boldly into the throne of grace to obtain mercy and find grace to help you in your time of need. I mean, we have an answer. We have resources. We have a resource, and it's him. We can come to him for timely help, as Andrew put it, that we may boldly draw nigh to find grace for timely help. Jesus lives in heaven and in our heart to impart to us his own spirit of obedience. So he even gives us his spirit of obedience because of our weakness to obey, because of the pull of our flesh to pull us away from obedience. It says, so that his priesthood may bring us into the full enjoyment of all he himself has and is. His priesthood may bring us into full enjoyment. He wants us, remember I said a few videos ago that Andrew had talked about, we can always live in the presence of God. We can. That is available to us. And for Jesus, that's part of what he has. He's constantly in the Holy of Holies. He is God, and he's in the presence of the Father. And he comes to us by the power of the Spirit to help us with our obedience. He learned obedience through suffering. Learn to look upon and to welcome all suffering as God's message to teach obedience. I've got to tell you, this is a secret. This is a key. When you are facing something that is suffering, it is some form of things aren't going right in your life, or it's a deep loss, or just the temptations and trials of just being alive in this earth right now. When you can look upon it as God's message to teach you obedience. And really, that's part of casting your care upon God. He says that we are to cast it on him because he cares for us. So when we trust in God, and we're not trying to figure out these trials and temptations all on our own. We're not trusting in ourselves to just pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and make it through. But when we're trusting God, when we're putting it on him, he actually gives us the power. He actually strengthens us internally to face it. And, I think about that scripture where it says, I think it's in 1 Peter, where it says we're to cast our care on him because he cares for us. And then it talks about, and I might have them inverted, maybe we can get that on the screen, but it talks about God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And see, when you're proud and you're like, I can figure this out. I can do this. I don't need any help. God sees that as pride. And when you are a proud person, then you've just put yourself in the position of God actively fighting against you. That's what the word opposes means there in the Greek. So now you not only have a problem that you're trying to work through on your own strength, but now you've got God fighting you. I mean, that's a big mess. You've just gone from the frying pan into the fire. But God says if you humble yourself and you cast your care on him, and you say, God, I'm no match for this problem or this trial, then God gives grace to you. He actually strengthens you because you've humbled yourself and you said, I can't handle this. I need you. And he says, okay, let me help you. I mean, it's pretty simple. It really is. Okay, so a few more things and then Andrew closes here. But obedience, the entrance into the will of God. Okay, that's a definition. I love that. Obedience is the entrance into the will of God. He says it's also the very essence of salvation. So when we're entering into the will of God, we're entering, it's the very essence of salvation. I just think that's beautiful. It's very simple yet profound that obedience with our hearts bent on doing the will of God is salvation itself. Jesus learned obedience. His was obedience embodied, obedience incarnate. I have only as much of Jesus in me as I have of the spirit of obedience. Wow. So many people these days are calling themselves Christ followers, or, yeah, I know Jesus, or, yeah, I believe in God. But you know what God said? And again, we need to put this scripture up. I want to say it's in 2 Chronicles 20, but I don't know. But God says that, it's a much quoted first part of the verse where it says, my people, not my people perish for lack of knowledge, but that is a good one. But my people who are called by my name, if they will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and forgive their sin and heal their land. I looked into that scripture, and it literally means the people that are saying they believe me to be their God, the people that are calling on me saying, yeah, I'm a Christ follower, I'm a God follower. If my people, those people that are calling on saying they belong to me, that's what I'm trying to say. The people that say that they belong to me, they have to humble themselves and pray and seek my face. And then they have to turn away from their wickedness. He's talking about the people that say they belong to God. Turn from your wickedness. And then he said, then you're gonna see things happen. Then will I forgive their sin, heal their land. What does it say? Then will I forgive their sin. Then I think I just quoted it a minute ago, but maybe we can put it up there. Then will I hear from heaven. That's it. Forgive their sin and heal their land. So it goes right along with what Andrew said. I have only as much of Jesus in me as I have of the spirit of obedience. So when we're willing to obey God, not in a robotic fashion, but with our whole heart, because we love God and we love Jesus and the sacrifice he made for us, we come with a humble heart, then we will obey him, and then Jesus will be abundantly supplied in our heart to meet every need. Well, thank you again for watching. Please share this out with someone that might need to hear it at this time, and hope you join me for the next time. God bless.